We've looked at introduction, literature review, materials and method or methodology. Now let's move on to results and discussion, as well as other aspects that finishes up your uh, reporting of scientific research. Your research usually, in depending on the guideline that you have been given, your chapter 4 should be your results and discussion. So the first subsection, the way I usually structure my own work and the logical approach that I've realized with it would be to look at the first uh, aspect of the work, maybe to kind of present a general overview of the study area where I've carried out the investigation based on the data that has been collected. So, for example, if I use a questionnaire and I ask question about the characteristics of the people, the socioeconomic circumstances, and things like that. So, in my first section, the 4.1, I may address these general characteristics of the respondent. Then moving on to 4.2 now, I will now pick each of the objective and now start talking about the result that is attached to each of the objective. Okay, so 4.1, I usually discuss the general characteristics of the respondent or the circumstances in which you are doing the investigation. Then I move on 4.2, 4.3 to address each of the objective by tying the result to it. So the result could be general presentation of data and also the result of the hypothesis testing. That is what is presented there. In some schools, in some areas, they do more than 5 chapters, but the general idea is that once you get to the result and discussion, you make sure you have a kind of organized way of presenting the result, which means each of the objectives must be addressed so that there is a general logical organization to the results. Then the final part, in some schools, in some circumstances, discussion comes as its own chapter, but within our own context, discussion comes as part of your results and discussion chapter. So create also, just like the way you discuss each objective, have a subsection of discussion also for each objective, which means you are relating your own findings for each of the objective to the existing body of knowledge. This is what you found. Is it in agreement with previous works of so, or is contrary to previous work? So you want to situate your work within existing body of knowledge. So in discussion, that is what you do. You relate your current work to previous work. Okay? Then this should be very easy if you have done a proper literature review, because now this is why I keep saying literature review is very important for your work, because if you have done a brilliant work with your literature review, it makes all the other aspects of your work easy to do. It makes your introduction easy to do. It makes your methodology easy to do. It makes your discussion easy to do. And also when it comes to conclusion, it will be easier once you have done your result and discussion appropriately based on very good literature review. It makes also conclusion easy to do. So another aspect is that if you don't want to have a subsection, another way to do it is that if you don't want to have a subsection for the discussion, you can also put the discussion at the end of each of the presentation of a result. Okay, but it might look it depends on what is acceptable in your area, but I prefer putting a different section where I talk about the discussion separately. But at times, when you are writing, you might quickly put the discussion at the end of each subsection of your presentation of results, and later you can copy it out and put it in a different section of your discussion. But take advice from your supervisor and your superiors so that they can guide you on what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. So the tradition in your area is what will dictate how you present your results and discussion. So the final part is conclusion and recommendation. So the first part of this chapter, which is your chapter 5, is to do a kind of summary of your work. Okay, bring out the key points so that it's easy to identify what you have done. Okay, what are the key things that have come out of your work? Okay, objective 1, objective 2, objective 3. What are the major things that are coming out of this work? So have a summary. Second section, you have your conclusions. This is not reporting your results. You are drawing conclusions from the result. Okay? Do not start saying there is a statistically significant relationship at this level in this. No. You are deduce from the results that you have obtained. So, just like I've highlighted when you're doing your presentation of results, pick each objective, draw conclusion. Okay? Draw conclusion based on your data and the analysis. Don't represent the results. Draw conclusions. Okay? Then the last chapter, the last segment for your, not the last, but one of the important other segment you must have in your conclusion and recommendation is the limitation. What are the challenges you encounter and how did you handle them? What are the limits of interpretation of your result? Okay, so this should read or interpretation, not of interpretation. So what are the limits of interpretation or application of the result? So you must state this in your write-up. Okay, then you finish it up with recommendation. Look carefully at your results and conclusion and recommend what should we do going forward. Based on what you have found out, what should be the next line of research? What should subsequent research look at? That is, the things that you have not considered in your work that may also be important to look at in order to get a full picture of the phenomenon under investigation. Don't start making recommendations that are not based on your findings. You see people talking about government should do so thing, and the thing that they are saying government should do as their recommendation, they have never investigated it in their work. It was never part of their investigation. So why are you making recommendation of what you never investigated? You don't have to have 2 million or 20, 30, 40 recommendations. Your recommendation could be one, and it should be based on your findings. If I investigated social vulnerability, the pattern of social vulnerability to flooding in so place, and I found out that so region in that study area have a very, very low level of vulnerability, social vulnerability, while some areas have medium and some places have very high level of vulnerability. My recommendation will be that efforts and measures should be put in place to support this area to lower their social vulnerability. I'm not going to be saying that government should build flood prevention mechanism so as to prevent flood. No, I didn't investigate flood and the biophysical dimension of flood. I investigated social vulnerability to flood. So my recommendation should be restricted to that area that I study in terms of social vulnerability. I can do some specific in terms of what are the specific things or specific aspect of the social vulnerability that I think could be adjusted, because I'm not just going to measure just only one thing within social vulnerability. There are so many other aspects to it. So maybe during my my data collection and the investigation and the analysis, I realized that the income part or the savings part or the community cohesion that helps people to build resilience or build capacity to withstand emergency and disasters. If I realize that those are the aspects that makes their vulnerability to be high, I can make suggestion on what could be done towards this specific aspect. I am not in a position to start talking about gully erosion should be prevented by doing so and so. That was not my investigation. My recommendation should be limited to my findings and conclusion. It is very important. I've seen a lot of people make mistakes in this area. Now, you finish it up by saying, what is your contribution to knowledge, especially when you are writing thesis. Okay? This does not have to be extensive, but it must address the gap that you identify in your chapter 2. Okay? Because if you state in your chapter 2 that these are the gaps that you have identified, you must be working towards filling one of those gaps. So, tell us which of the gaps have you filled. Don't report your result again. Tell us specifically which of the research gap have you filled, which of the literature gap have you filled. It's as simple as that. One sentence or two sentences explaining or highlighting the research gap that you have, or the literature gap, the gap in literature that you have filled. It's as simple as that. So you see why it's important to do your literature review very well. It also fulfills a need when you get to your chapter 5, where you have to write your contribution to knowledge.